We're away. All our authentication. Do you want me to go first?
Yes, on the accessible living standards. Do you want to just introduce it?
Have a look. So we've got a few students that were here later in the week yesterday that are doing the full-time timetable, and we looked a little bit at some of the rules and regulations for the Class 2 project on Friday last week, and we cover a little bit of stuff that we're going to recover again this week, so they get an extra helping of some of the rules and regulations, the structure and the way it works. So we're just going to give it out as if it's never happened before, and they get a double dose.
Awesome.
But one of the things that I wanted to show you is a set of guidelines, and these are not regulations. So you'll remember, we've talked already a little bit about, I look a little bit lost, excuse me. Talked a little bit about policies, procedures, work instructions, and the hierarchy of governance that covers all the different documents that you might find yourself having to comply with in an industry. So you've got policy, procedure, regulation, and then usually at the bottom it's work instructions or guidelines. That's a good way of looking at it. Guidelines is a good way to describe it. So what we wanted to show you this morning was a set of guidelines that are called the Livable Housing Design Guidelines. Sorry, can I get in front of you?
In front of you.
For a Class 1 and 10 project, the NCC and the Australian standards don't require that you must have access for disabled people, so wheelchair access or people who can't walk as well as you'd like, or even people who have visual impairments as well. It's not just about wheelchairs necessarily. There's no rule that says you have to have that for Class 1 and 10 buildings. You have to have it for public buildings, but for private buildings, the rules don't necessarily mandate it. However, there are some guidelines which are not mandated, which are excellent guidelines should you wish to apply accessible living conditions to a Class 1 and 10 design or building.
So
Now,
we remember that Class 1 and 10 is domestic housing, so privately owned housing. So I can tell you that overseas and back in Ireland where I trained, this is a regulation as opposed to a guideline. So it is law that you do need to provide, for instance, a level entrance to the front door of your house, or it can be any door, actually, any entrance door. And it's also regulation that you must provide an ambulance, disabled, accessible bathroom on that entry level. So the reason why that was brought in was because councils and governments got really sick of providing lots and lots of grant funding to the elderly as they got older to convert their housing to accommodate them, if they could no longer climb the stairs to use the bathroom, and they would have to give them a grant to extend the house to build a bathroom on the ground floor level. So after a while, it became regulation that you did, when you were constructing new housing, you had to do this automatically. I foresee that will eventually happen in Australia, but for now, it's not a regulation. It's on that lower level, and it's a guideline. So you don't have to do it, but it may be advisable, and especially if your clients are elderly or, just maybe have some mobility issues or have a child with mobility issues, then of course that will be part of that initial brief when you take the brief to recommend to them that they may want to think about accessibility for disability.
this is a really good set of guidelines. It's a how-to, if you like. It gives some pretty concrete examples of what you can do. I think there are 3 different levels that you can use and follow. So they've got platinum, gold, silver, gold, and platinum. So we're starting pretty high with silver. But it's quite good. They actually have some specific tools about what you can achieve. It's with regards to making sure everything's all on one level, the width of corridors, the width of doorways, the width of bathrooms, turning space for wheelchairs. Very similar stuff to the Australian standard for disabled access. 1428 is the code for that one. But like Sandra said, it's not mandatory. This is simply a guideline should you want to do it. I'm just clicking randomly, trying to find where the actual information is. Let's see what we can find. It shouldn't be this difficult to find the actual guidelines. Design guidelines.
Downloads?
Downloads? Oh, yes, that's always a good one. Here we go, design guidelines. That's what I want. And there's a printout. Juan's got it in his hand, just coming around. Gone to the trouble of actually printing it out because it's nice to have a look at a piece of paper sometimes. Lots of pretty pictures. I will literally screen through really fast to the actual content that we're really interested in. Lots of statistics of why it's a good idea. Sometimes funding is given to organisations to produce documents like this, but they have to sell the concept, so there's a lot of data about that. Nothing wrong with that. It's a good idea. We're already sold. We already think it's a good idea. We just want to know how. Here we go, the actual things. So we're into page 18 before we get some real information. So at the silver level, they're saying provide continuous step-free pathways from the front of the building all the way through. Have no steps. Make 1,000 millimetre wide hallways and doorways, a metre basically. Have a nice even slip-resistant surface. Don't have a crossfall of more than a 1 in 40 slope. There's a concept for you. So 1 in 40. I'll exaggerate that a little bit. So,
40.
Sorry?
1 in 40.
Yeah, so the 1 in 40 slope. So over a metre, you only want to fall 40 millimetres. You don't want any steeper than that. So the height difference between here and here over the distance of 1 metre needs to be no more than 40 millimetres, which is just a nice, kind gradient for people who are maybe having a bit of trouble navigating stairs and want to walk slowly or are actually in a wheelchair. Sorry, that's the crossfall. This is 1 in 14, the pathway slope. Sorry.
Why is the ratio, wouldn't it be 1,000 to 40?
Yeah.
Shouldn't that be 1 metre for 40 metres distance?
Yeah, it should.
It's just always written like that.
Yeah.
It's just a 1 in 20 or a 1 in 14 or a 1 in 40 or the common ones you'll come across for this project.
1 in 14.
1 metre.
2 mil.
Yeah. So the units don't match.
Yeah.
It's 14.
Yeah.
So it's quite slow. And you have to, there's a certain distance that you should travel before there's a respite spot, somewhere where it's flat, where you can
Have a rest.
Yeah, have a rest. So where ramps are required, they should have landings provided at no greater than 9 metres, there it is, so that you've got some space where it's flat. Path of travel, lots of dimensions with regards to car parking, width and having slip-resistant surfaces. So these are not specifically the Australian standards for disabled access, but they're just good principles to go by, and a lot of them are similar. So then it goes up, there's a gold level. I'm not going to go into it too much, but it's wider.
The fall is shallower.
Yeah. And platinum. And then there should be, they've got some images of what's a good principle.
These are probably good diagrams to have a look at.
Yeah, this is what I was really looking for. It's blurry. So the maximum fall, is that 56 millimetres there?
There's 56 millimetres there, and then so you have a ramp gradient here of 1 in 8. But if you've got a ramp gradient of 1 in 8, that's quite a sharp slope. So then there'll be a minimum or a maximum distance you're allowed to have a fall of 1 in 8 for. So obviously, if you've got a very long path and you want it to wind slowly up, you'd be looking at more like a 1 in 14. But if you've just got a very short ramp that's going up to like an entrance door, a threshold, you could just increase the steepness or the slope of that ramp and put it to a 1 in 8, but over a shorter distance.
Yeah, is that 450 there?
I think that says 450, yeah, maximum. Yeah, so it's very, very short, less than half a metre.
And obviously the door should open inwards so that you can get in the doorway. You don't want to have to pull the door towards you on the ramp.
How many of you would have experience with someone who has had a disability, like pushing a wheelchair for somebody else, or perhaps you've spent some time in a wheelchair yourself?
Crutches are probably the closest.
No one. So it's something like we as designers, like not a lot of us have experience in. And I know myself, I used to be a little bit frustrated in the beginning of my career when I'd have to put in all this extra area for ramps, and you know, it just seemed like it was overkill. However, then I became a mother and I had a pram to push. And suddenly I realised the huge advantage of not having steps and not having steps at entrances, and how difficult it was to get into buildings that actually had a flight of stairs, that didn't have a ramp facility. And suddenly it dawned on me that this is how people who have a disability must feel when they can't access spaces or buildings or housing that they really need to. So, you know, it's worth putting yourself in the position of someone, and it's not just about wheelchair users. When we talk about accessibility, we're really thinking about people with impaired vision, so the handrails, the little bumpy things, the tactile indicators that, you know, tell someone that they're about to change direction or fall, or all of those things, and also people with auditory issues as well. So it covers a wide range of people, and also every single one of us in this room, hopefully, is going to get old. And we are going to become less agile and less able to do those flights of stairs without the handrails and without all of those things. So it's not for a particular portion of our society, it's for all of us, because at some point in all our lives we will want to have these extra facilities to assist us in moving around.
Quite a bit of information in here about toilets. Again, I'm just going to skip to the diagram. So it's about the amount of room and circulation space. So that's the same as the Australian standards for disabled access toilets for if it's just the WC. Sorry, that's not true. It's not the same as the Australian standards. It's the same as the NCC, where if you've got a door swing, there needs to be at least 1,200 millimetres from the edge of the door to the front of the pan, enough room for somebody to collapse and still be able to open the door and get them out. Because obviously if you collapse in the toilet and you're stopping the door from being able to open, nobody can get you out. So you've got to either have a door that you can lift off or can get in and around underneath, or there has to be enough room for the person.
Or the door can open out.
Pardon?
That's an NCC.
Yes, that's an NCC thing.
Just go back up.
House that doesn't have that, do I get money back from my...
No, because probably when your house was built, this wasn't a regulation. Oh.
Yeah, then it was.
But it's not a regulation for housing. Within the NCC, disability access is only regulated for our public buildings, so our class 2 to 9.
And it's sorry,
It doesn't apply to clubs, because I know that clubs, the door swing is like much less than that.
It absolutely does apply to clubs if you were building one today.
If you've been one today.
However, if that club was built before the standards came into being, then yes, it would have got away. So.
Yeah, but yeah.
There would be like a disabled toilet in most places.
Yeah.
Yes, but shall I say, the standard WC suite also needs to comply with this, because again, it's not just okay to have one toilet on the end that's built for wheelchair accessibility. All of your facilities need to be ambulant disabled accessible. So in the NCC, it specifies exactly how many ambulant accessible toilets there would need to be for however many occupants of a building, how many standard WCs, and then how many wheelchair accessible shower facilities there would also need to be as well. quite a range of facilities. So could we just go back up, the one there with the door? So the other option, if you don't have this length of space to put your WC, is to put the door opening outwards. So obviously when you pull the door and you open outwards, you need less space inside the WC there. But if the door opens inwards, you have to get in and somehow have the room to get around and be able to swing the door back to close it again. So we've all experienced that in older buildings where that's very tiny, you know. I don't think I'm a huge person, but I've struggled sometimes, you know, if you've got a rucksack with you or something, you're trying to get in around the door in the older buildings. So this is to avoid that happening, even for able-bodied people.
Mm.
Yeah. What if someone gets back to combination?
Yeah. There's just an idea of how a bathroom might be able to be laid out with some space to move. So the same phenomenon there, the 1200 between the door opening and the hand basin. This 820 clear opening is the silver level of the door width. As the platinum and gold and platinum levels go up, the door width gets wider. That's a standard door width, 820, so that's not anything special, and you could go a bit wider than that. And then just a space for the shower with some reinforcing in the walls that will let the grab rails connect to them. If you just put the grab rails into the plasterboard or the tiles, they're not necessarily going to be strong enough to hold the weight of the person who's relying on them.
So I must show you some fantastic pictures. I was in Sydney recently, and I went to the new convention centre down there, and I went very urgently. Trying to find a toilet in Sydney is not the easiest thing to do, and so by the time we got up to the convention centre, I really needed to go. And when we went in, the only toilet I could see was the disabled accessible toilet, so I went in there, but I was delighted I did. I went in, and this was the biggest, and I won't even call it what we expect to see a toilet. It was huge. It was a really big room. I had 2 WCs in there, both with different configurations of handrails. It had a change table for an adult. I've never seen this before. I've never experienced this in any other, so this is brand new. So this, and it had a hoist that you could lift the adult up to change them. So, you know, we've got a population with huge ranges of disabilities, and I had read something that this was on the cards, that, you know, we would provide change facilities for adults in public places, but this is the first time I've ever seen it. So I have the pictures, I'll bring them out and show them to you, but it was absolutely huge. So, you know, when we were always grabbing at these, you know, 450 mils or whatever, this was quarter the size of this room. It was plenty of space in there to do all of the necessary things you might need to do while you're out about in public.
Raffles, left-hand ambulatory disabled toilet, whatever it is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
configurations are different, yeah.
That's clever. They would have a lot of slip resistance needed, I guess, with the wet floor. What was that? That was toilets. This was showers. So a bit of an idea of the dimensioning that you could use for thresholds and turning areas and things like that.
And one of the big things for showers is that your tiling is just sloped to a fall, and you don't have any around the shower edge, that we don't have fixed shower doors, or you just have like curtains, but you also don't have any ridges where people have to step up and in, because for elderly people that can be quite difficult for them, and that's a lot of falls in the shower occur by elderly people tripping over something wet surface, and they've fallen and broken their hip.
Reinforcement, that was a bit what I was talking about, having places in the wall to fix the handrails. Different handrail configurations.
With the handrail configuration,
Yeah.
in the Australian standards, is there a set thing as to where the handrail is in place to the bowl and the paper towel, like the toilet roll holder?
I expect so.
Yep.
I think some of them are out of place because you think, how's a handicap building again?
Yeah.
To the toilet roll, the problem with the toilet roll holder is that sometimes the toilet roll holder can actually impede the disabled person getting onto the toilet.
Yeah.
So it does sit further away than we would normally expect to see it in most of these configurations.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of them
They're so big.
it was actually in the road with the rail, and I thought, if somebody really needed a rail, that
That would get in the way.
on the rail.
It's a Good point.
It's very specific where all these things need to go. You do get a little bit of tolerance to play with of around, you know, it needs to be, on some of them maybe 180 mil to 320. So you've got like a little bit of 100 mil play there that you can move it around, but it's quite fairly specific where it needs to be.
This is a good inclusion where switches and power points should be. So higher up, it's quite common. I don't know if you can see. There's a power point just behind it. No, you can't see it. But typically, your power points are 300 millimeters above the ground, above finished floor level. That's quite a long way down to bend. And if your appliance has a bit of a funny, sharp edge, or if it's a bit stiff and you can't get the plugs to line up properly, so they're just saying bring them up a little bit and make them a little bit higher, so between 900 millimeters and 1100 millimeters above finished floor level. So where you're standing is finished floor level. It's finished because it's got a top on it. It's not just the structure, but it's got vinyl or tiles or carpets, or thing. Measure from there and get it up off the ground, which is pretty cool. And then these are a special type of switch for platinum level, where it's not the smaller general purpose outlet switch that we're used to. It's more of a touch switch. Yeah, they're quite large, what they call a rocker action, or just a push pad, something like that. So they're quite common these days as well.
And so for people, say, with arthritis, who start finding small tasks or to do with their fingers quite difficult to do, again, the big pads assist that. The other one is the lever handles, which we have on the doors here. It was found, and I'm not sure so much in Australia how much you had those turn handles that everyone used to have the turn handles. I know in Europe they were everywhere. And people with arthritis, when they, again, an aging population, they couldn't open the doors. So part of this was to turn all the handles into levers or D handles, so people could get a good grip on the handles.
And the taps and things like that as well.
And the levers on the taps.
Like they've got in medical areas where you just use your elbows if you have to. If you've washed your hands, you don't have to touch them. Nice and easy.
Would there be any changes made to this for existing buildings like hotels and motels? Do they have to apply these changes straight away?
Everything's moving forward, so anything new needs to pick up the new regulations, but that doesn't mean you have to go back in time and fix things.
No.
Okay.
No. But if you're doing a refurb of a hotel
if
fit
you
out,
change something,
that's fine.
it picks up the new regulations. Remember, this isn't mandatory. This is optional. Yeah.
Optional for class 1 and 10.
Yeah.
Which we're doing 1 and 10 today.
Let's clarify. 1 and 10 only. So residential. What's this one about? Windowsills.
So again, it's a bit like the lever handles. The controls need to be able to be opened by someone who's...
If you're sitting in a wheelchair and you want to open the window, if the window's too high, you have to keep it shut. Flooring, obviously non-slip, firm, and a level transition. That's probably the last of it. I've got this for all new homes in Australia achieved the LHD Silver Livability Rating. It's a nice goal. So, livable housing design. As it's coming around, have a bit of a look, bookmark it, put it in your pocket, keep it for future reference. It's a good thing to incorporate. There is an apartment complex in Palmerston that was built according to Australian Standards 1428 for disabled access, even though it didn't have to be. It was a conscious decision by the developer to create disabled access housing apartments. And they've also got a community centre next door and access to different areas and community living spaces and things like that worked into it. So it's a bit like a village, not necessarily just habitable spaces. So there'll be more of it, I suspect, in the future.
Yeah. And you'll certainly, those of you who are full-time, when you go on to do the commercial projects, this is mandatory, and we will absolutely have to apply it. But for those who are part-time and only looking at the class 1s in this unit, just take this document, have a read, be aware that this exists, be aware that your client may ask you for it on request, but it's not mandatory.
I've got a colleague who lives in an elevated house and he plans on retiring there, and he's perfectly capable of taking the stairs at the moment, but he set aside framing and structure in the original for a lift, like a small hydraulic single person lift that will just take him from the ground floor to the elevated section without too much hassle. So it's like a standalone object.
That's a more likely answer with townhomes as opposed to a very big ramp. Like that
Well, yeah, if he wanted to use a ramp, he'd have to start so far away to get that high. So a lift straight up is obviously a good solution for him. But and he lives in a remote area. He's a long way away from town, so he definitely needs to be able to. Him and his wife, they want to stay there forever, and they know one day they're not going to be able to take the stairs, so they're planning for it in advance. So people do build their forever homes, and it's important to think about it. Even though you want stairs early on, it's not always going to be so fun later.
So just on a note on your question on ramps, it's quite a good question. The length of ramps, it's a little bit of a pet hate of mine, is that some of our most beautiful buildings are being, the entrance to them is being somewhat, the architectural design has been taken out of it by series of ramps that just, because the ramp has to be so long, because our fall is very gradual, or our slope is very gradual, that's obviously for the users themselves, but the ramps sometimes become excessively lengthy, and they're not always done with a true consideration. So my tip for that is try and incorporate it into your landscaping as well. So if you know that you want the level to rise towards the house, incorporate that into the driveway, into your garden, slope the garden up so that it's not flat, and then you suddenly come to the house and have to, go up 6-7 steps in a ramp, because it doesn't look pretty, and the ramp is very, very lengthy. I just did a building year and a half ago at Nakara School, so obviously needs disabled accessibility, and so the building had a veranda that was probably 600 millimeters above natural ground level, and so I probably should draw something here to explain this. Do your whiteboard marker, thank you so much. So we probably had, let's just say this is our building, and the ground was doing this, and so here we had about 600 millimeters rise, and with the builder was suggesting building this series of ramps that had to sort of zigzag all the way up here. That's a terrible drawing of a ramp, but it kind of went this direction, zigzagging. So instead of doing that, what we did was we brought the park that came out in front of the building, we sloped that right up to the building, and put a path then that sloped with the grass, integrated into the landscaping up to the veranda. It meant we actually reduced the expense. We had no handrails. We didn't have to provide handrails at all. So when you provide ramps, you have to provide handrails, and they sort of block the vision and they block the access straight across. So for this one, we avoided doing that, and we just ramped right up along. So we ramped right along with the natural fall, and the disabled accessibility happened up at this end of the veranda, and here we just incorporated some steps that sort of faded away into the landscape, like that. I'll bring you some photographs. It's a terrible drawing.
I did one similar for the school in Rapid Creek, St. Paul's. We had to have handrails.
Yeah.
But popular in the end. All right. So the next thing we wanted to just bring your attention to, another website, a different aspect, again, of this procedural diagram that we keep going back to, policy and procedure. This one is a code of practice, which is probably higher than a guideline, probably similar to a procedure, but not quite as instructional. So a procedure is normally a step-by-step instruction of how to get something done in a compliant way. Code of practice is, it doesn't really fit with any of our categories. I suppose you could put it in the regulations bucket, if you like. But this one is with regards to work health and safety for designers. So it's called the Safe Design of Structures Code of Practice. So I'll pass this around so you can have a bit of a look at. And it'll be another website that you'll want to grab and pocket and save, bookmark. So out of Safe Work Australia, it'll be called, if you Google, Safe Design of Structures Code of Practice. And I'm pretty sure it's still the July 2012 version. So the idea is that when you are designing a building, it needs to be safe to draw, construct, maintain, live in, and demolish, or renovate and demolish, not necessarily. So there's a whole life cycle of a building, and it has to be safe to operate under all those circumstances. So this code of practice asks for that. Now, the best example I can think of a design that may not necessarily be safe to operate would be something where you've got a sheer cliff face and you want to hang your building out over the top of that cliff face. You can imagine trying to build that would be quite hazardous. Now, you can manage that risk if you do want it, but it's something that you would have to declare early and be aware of. Any high buildings, any high roofs that you'd have to work on would fall under this code of practice where you would have to be careful of that. Anything that you design, you have to think about what it's going to be like for the manufacturer or the construction workers or the renovator or the occupant or somebody who's demolishing it later. They have to be able to pull it apart again and take it off. So if you've got a big, steep, winding, sloped driveway that comes up, so I'm thinking about Government House in the city, there's quite a significant drop on the other side of the garden as you're coming up, and then you circle into the front of the house. If you want to be able to access that side of the house, you've got to put access all the way down to the lower driveway to get up there. So there's lots of height issues with regards to buildings, and that can be really tricky. So the idea of the 5 principles of safety and design is to think about the whole life cycle of the building, not just necessarily at the construction phase. The occupants have to be safe to use it as well. So just very quickly, and I'll pass this around so you can have a bit of a look at it. Again, another document that you should have in your arsenal, just to be aware of. So the principle 1 is that the persons with control, those who make the decisions affecting the design of products, facilities or processes, are able to promote health and safety at the source. Then there's the product life cycle. So safe design applies to every stage in the life cycle, from conception through to disposal. And it involves eliminating hazards and minimising risks as early in the life cycle as possible. And then principle 3 is the systematic risk management. So it's not necessarily just at the inception, but also managing the risks throughout the project or the life of the building. Everybody has a duty of care. So systematic risk management, applying hazard identification, risk assessment and risk control processes to achieve safe design. And then principle 4 is the safe design knowledge and capability, and should be either demonstrated or acquired by those who control the design. And then information transfer is the effective communication and documentation of design and risk control information amongst everyone involved in the phases of the life cycle, essential for the safe design approach. So it's quite wordy, it's a little bit of a nice to have, if you like. It sounds like it's quite high level, but the implementation of it is reasonably straightforward. You are simply looking at identifying issues and managing those risks as you go. So those examples that I gave you are probably pretty extreme examples. Most typical construction where you're either on the ground or in a typical development are not going to pose significant risks. So this isn't something that will necessarily come up over and over and over again for you, but it's something to consider, and it's your fallback, if you like, to always do it in accordance with the Safety Design Code of Practice.
So another example of that isn't quite so obvious as the one Lisa just gave is, for instance, in Darwin, if we don't control humidity and condensation in our buildings, that could lead to mold growth. And it could lead to mold growth within the cavity of your walls or your roof space, which in turn is a health hazard to the occupants of that building. So right back, that's all the way down through until we have occupants, but right back at the very beginning in the design phase, somebody had to make the decision to put in vapor control or, some sort of vapor barrier into the construction to prevent that happening. And as a designer, that's your job to remember to put that in and to specify it on the drawings. So that's what we mean by that. We have to look at the risks, and when you do your research on your materials that you're using, part of that research should be to look at the risks involved in the materials you're using. There's been a number of cases where windows haven't been fixed properly in buildings and the window just fell out. That's certainly a risk for the people walking below that building, and the window has come out and come away. So it's about the detailing as well. It's about the fixings and the risks. Sorry? Windows have fallen out in buildings. I'm sure you with air conditioning, there's a huge risk of Yeah, that can happen. And then with your air conditioning systems, you can have Legionnaire's disease, the risk of that in any sort of
Building syndrome
sick,
is a
sick
thing as
building
well, yeah,
syndrome.
yeah.
So there's,
I often wonder about this building, actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
Building that windows for that was a nice,
Oh, there was one in Matthew Street, was
That's
there?
true.
There's been a few.
Yeah.
the little, not Litchfield, street off the one around the back of the post office, that
Yeah,
corner there, is the highlight.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
They're just glued, they're not mechanically fixed.
Yep.
Yeah, so if the glue doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit here about who's responsible for safe design. So it's resting with the architects, the industrial designers or draft person, that's you guys, who carry out the design on behalf of the client. Individuals who make design decisions during the life cycle phases, so engineers, manufacturers, suppliers, installers, builders, developers, project managers, and work health and safety professionals. So it's a bit like what Sandra was just saying, everybody has a role to play and the products that you're specifying have an impact. Anyone who alters the design, so that can be hasty. People can be a bit too quick to change something without really thinking it through. It's important that whoever's managing the project says that they must take the time to really analyse what the impact of that change might be, rather than just going, yeah, we can do it, when it isn't necessarily as safe for the whole project. Maybe something has been managed and it'll change the way that will work.
So an example of that would be, the building's complete, the builder's on site, he's building away, and he suddenly calls you up and says, I can't fit the stairs in, I just can't fit it in. It's the space here is shorter than what you've specified on the drawings, and you just say, oh yeah, just increase all the risers, and then suddenly you've gone over the regulation height for a riser on that stair, because that's a decision you've made in haste on the phone one day, and you've given them this instruction to go ahead. When you give them that instruction to go ahead, you've taken the responsibility, but you haven't done your due diligence, and you haven't checked out if that's now compliant or safe, as the case may be, and nobody notices. Everybody says, oh, the stairs is a little bit steep, but they don't do anything until, 5 years later, and somebody falls down the stairs and they decide to measure. And there's an inquiry into what's happened, and then suddenly the risk is coming back to you or whoever made that decision. So be careful about hasty decisions. Builders are on site, and the time's of all importance, and there's often lots of pressure to find a solution very, very quickly. However, you have a duty of care to not only comply with regulations, but also to have a safe outcome.
They're not paying them a couple $100 to go and have a copy while you sort it
Yeah,
out.
while you sort it out and do your due diligence
Best
and
$100
just wait.
spend.
Yeah.
The stairs there, oh my goodness. Yes.
Really?
The stairs up to the cinema and Gateway are insane.
Really?
Yes.
One way to say that.
Oh, it's a long way down. Yep.
Yeah.
And they're slippery, and they're
Ooh.
very wide, the handrails are miles away, don't even get me started.
Yeah. It's only a matter of time.
Yes. So if you,
Past if everyone read so bad.
well, they're probably within the limits.
They are
Yeah.
actually within the limit.
Yeah.
Just.
They're probably the smallest going and the highest riser you could possibly combine. Yeah.
So cut across.
Fitting in space.
It was a
Saving
long way to
space.
go. Yeah.
Saving
Yeah.
space and
Yeah.
fitting a space.
It's a
Yeah.
very high set of stairs.
Yeah.
So also responsible are any building service designers and other designers for fixed plant, such as ventilation or electrical systems, that's what Sandra mentioned, and any buyers who specify the characteristics of products and materials such as masonry blocks, and by default decide the weights bricklayers must handle. So that's about the choice of materials and what that means for the construction personnel. There isn't really too much more to know about it than that. They talk about the product life cycle that we have already mentioned. So if there's construction, if it's imported, how it's commissioned, how it's maintained and repaired, how it's decommissioned and disposed of or recycled.
I think I'm not sure how other people are aware, but the industry is certainly becoming more and more aware of imports coming in, products coming in that don't have the safety standards that we would be used to in Australia. And there certainly have been issues with products that have false certification, which actually
Yeah,
there's
they're
nothing
fake.
you can do about, but they're
Yeah.
fake. So not only do you want to see the little fire safety stamps or the R ratings of installations, they're being marketed for the industry, so you got to go dig a little deeper than just the marketed information and find out if that they've got like proper certificates of currency and things like that that will back up that. But it's very difficult. I've often got them and they're in another language from another country, and you can't tell. You can't tell if it's genuine or not. But at least you've done your due diligence. You've sourced that information and you have a copy.
Yeah.
And then it's your choice. Whether do you still use the product or not? It's still your choice. You don't have to. You can say, well, I'm not happy with the accreditations here, so maybe we should look into another product.
There's a little bit of information about some of the benefits. So obviously preventing injury and disease is a key benefit. An improved usability of products and systems and facilities. So Sandra was just referencing fake products and products that are lacking in accreditation. If you don't shy away, if you stay away from those products, then you're going to build the industry that is compliant. So you actually have an impact on the way the industry is going to be going forward. So it's a good principle to stick to, and not something you'd necessarily want to be involved in if you're working for a company that was taking unaccredited products. So the flammable cladding saga began with products that were sold as accredited but were in fact not accredited. They weren't safe, they weren't fire tested. The testing was either never completed and was just documented, or it was allowed to be installed without any documentation at all. And it was as a consequence of a new product that was on the market called Alucobond, and it's an excellent product, an Australian product, quite expensive, looks really good, hard wearing, huge range of colours, easy to fix, really helps with the facade of a building, and other countries saw that as an opportunity to get into the market, and they produced fake versions of the same product and sold it as the original. And then it was just purchased by people who either were aware and ignored it, or who were unaware and didn't check properly and didn't do their due diligence. And then it was applied to buildings and come unstuck. So some buildings have those fake products attached to them, and it hasn't been an issue yet, but they've had to go back and recheck. So particularly in Victoria, there was a multi-storey building at the Docklands in Melbourne, where they were still under construction and they were applying the Alucobond finish to the outside of the building, and a construction worker flicked a cigarette and it got caught between the two panels and it went up from there. So it was so flammable, and it's supposed to be steel, it was so flammable that just a single cigarette was enough to ignite the glue in the panelling. So it clearly wasn't an authentic product, it was an imitation product, and they weren't aware of it at the time. So since then, inquiries have been held left and right to make sure that you're actually dealing with the appropriate product. So that's a particular product that has been suffering under these guidelines.
So we have a very local example of exactly this. Cladding's currently being replaced on the accommodation block up at the Casuarina shopping centre. I don't know if you've noticed the work going on there. So that building that was constructed out of
the
shipping containers, and then it was completely clad. The cladding that was put onto that was found to be non-compliant. And all of these tests are a result of that building in Melbourne, and also the Grenfell Tower disaster in London last year. So there was an Australia-wide testing of cladding that had gone on to buildings in the last number of years, and that was one of them. So that building is being reclad right at this moment in time, and it's being reclad, I understand, as an expense to the construction company, who didn't carry out their due diligence and didn't have the fire safety certificates for the cladding that they originally installed. But, it was obviously a good value product that they decided to invest in, and hasn't turned out to be such good value for them.
That wasn't a local company, though, was it, that built that?
I don't remember which company.
I believe it was.
Is it a different company?
It's a different company that's doing the recladding. Yes, it is. Yeah.
I did notice it was a different company that built it in the first place that's doing the recladding now.
Yeah.
It's not the same company originally, but I can't remember.
Yeah.
It wasn't
I
Halifax.
thought it was a company from WA or...
Might have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm not quite sure, so I'm not at liberty to say.
No.
So judging by that example, yeah.
I just thought it was ugly and it was stupidity, really.
Yeah, oh, it has lots of, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. Get sidetracked with that one. Improve productivity. So obviously if you're not having to redo things, your productivity is higher. Reduce costs, better prediction and management, production and operational costs over the life cycle of a product. You're complying with legislation and you can innovate within those safe design demands.
So yeah, this is a really good point. This is where I get really torn between this. So I am absolutely pro-innovation and using new products and looking towards the future and seeing where our industry can go, but there is a balance between, you know, your use of new products and products that haven't been tried and tested and safety and design. So that's a balance each of you will have to find for yourself in your working life.
Yeah.
But don't completely dismiss innovation. There are lots of people in this industry who are so safe that they can't imagine using the non-standard products that we, you know, are tried and tested over a long period of time. That's a very safe way to design, but it does quell innovation.
And it's also a personal choice, I suppose, too. If you're a smaller company or a smaller sole operating builder, you are liable for the defect for 30 years, essentially, and there's small parts of it that are more urgent in the beginning. So the official defects liability period for a construction might be 12 months here in the Northern Territory. It's not usually that long other places. It's longer here because of the wet season. So you have to have seen your construction through a full 52 weeks for it to be completely compliant. And then you're still liable later on down the track. But those smaller builders are probably less likely to put themselves out to risk, whereas a larger company that can manage that risk and have an aspect of building that's safer and then just have some projects that push the boundary a little bit further, I think have an obligation to try and find a way to innovate for the industry so that they can achieve the safety and design but still show that there can be new ways to do things. Because then it's once they've done it a couple of times and it's worked, that the other builders feel confident to have a go themselves. The other aspect is if you've got a client that is pushing for a particular innovation. So it can come from the industry, it can come from the client. If you've got a client that's particularly innovative or has a particular style of construction that they'd like to see achieved, they might be prepared to share some of that risk with the builder. So that can be a way to get it done as well. Does anybody have any questions about safety and design code of practice? This is probably the most, I just spotted this, I just stumbled across this. So see the height of the air conditioner here compared to the height of the air conditioning condensers on the right. So thinking about service people and the way that they access the things that they need to do is really important because repeat maintenance is required of appliances and fixtures and fittings, and up here air conditioning is the one thing you don't want to fail. And it's the one thing you want to be able to get repaired quickly and inexpensively when it does fail. So I suppose that's probably the best lesson is keep your air conditioning units accessible for repairs. And the pool pump as well.
And the pool pump, yeah. We had a lovely one with our connection, our electrical connection to our house is overhead. And so in one of the big storms there about 2 years ago, I don't really know why, but it has a safety wire on it, so it completely disconnected from the house and the safety wire held it up, but it was like swooping right down. We had no electricity for 3 days because it kept raining and no electrician would go on our roof because the roof was obviously a metal-clad roof and it sloped and it was raining, so it was extremely slippy, and there's no way he could get a ladder or a structure up there to reconnect it. So we had no power for 3 days. Just because of how that was or where it was located and how it was connected in. So when you're designing, again, you want to be thinking about these things. Access for maintenance is very important.
And everybody who has underground power is glad in a cyclone when the trees come down that it doesn't take their power lines out.
And no power wants to switch the power on people.
Yeah. I got lucky, I was all right in Palmerston. All right. Has everybody got that bookmark?
So obviously we go through these documents reasonably quickly, but they are there and bookmarked, and we ask you to take note of them so that you can go through them in more detail in your own time.
Beautiful. How are we doing? We need more
I'll go through one more bit. What else do we have? We've got the different disciplines, don't we?
You'll probably get that done.
Yeah. So last week, do we have a copy of that? Oh, they were over here. Yeah. So last week, early last week. You would have all received a copy of this, is that right?
Very first day.
Okay, I've got some more copies here if anyone doesn't have it with them. Well, we're just going to have a look at who this design team is that we are always... You need one too, Andy. Who are these design teams that we talk about all the time? Who are the personnel in there? Yeah, well, I was kind of thinking of getting everybody up to Scribe.
Oh, yes, brainstorm away.
Why not? Here you go, Andy. So building design personnel. Who wants to volunteer a person who might be on the design team? And I'm going to get everyone up out of their seat one at a time. As soon as you have an offering, go for and write it on the board. Us. So what are you?
The designer?
How about a building designer?
Yes, but.
Yeah. Yeah, building designer. So stemming from the drafting industry, the building designers have grown in numbers and recognition over the past few decades. Some states and territories you are required to hold a license, not in the Northern Territory. You can be a part of the Building Designers Association. So I suppose you can get student membership to the NT chapter of the BDA. It is available, and actually I should send an email out around that in the next few weeks, so you can join that if you want to. So building designers can design buildings, and really I suppose we specialise in the technical side of building design, how that building goes together, how does it comply, how does it all go together. So that's what we in this room want to become proficient at. Anyone else got any ideas? Well, you got them all in front of you, but it's always good to get some group going.
What's the fancy word for a drafter? Architectural drafter, what's the fancy word? Technician. Thank
Architectural
you.
technician,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Chuck it up on
Overseas, that's what, there's no such thing as a drafty. I never heard that word before I came to Australia. You're an architectural technician.
Do you want to write it up on the board, Kibby?
Come on.
Right. I'll do it for you.
You're going to scribe for him. Oh yeah, you got it there.
Okay.
Anyone else got any ideas? If I said you're all going to the design team meeting this morning, who would you expect to see there?
So we have an engineer over here. What kind of engineer?
What kind of engineer? We've also structural engineer. What does he do? Or she?
Yeah.
I was looking at the weights and the stresses and the layers, the dead layer.
Ooh. Look out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did
So
everybody catch that? Can you hear him down the back there, Paul?
What?
So we were just talking about the structural engineer and what they do. And you can hear him okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
What other kinds of
So what is a structure? What? Come on, give me more. Hang on.
Inside the steel, the full skeleton.
The skeleton of the building. Exactly what the structural engineer is all about. What gives the building the strength? What's holding it up? Yeah. Yeah.
Juan, what did you say?
Electrical engineer.
Electrical?
Keep going.
Is that the right word that I'm looking for, do you think?
Should do like
Electrical engineer. What does he do? Or she? Really shouldn't be sexist here. What does that person do? Out loud, please, because everyone has to hear you.
Yeah, share it, share it.
Come on, we're all friends
They
here.
do the electrical connections for the whole entire building.
Yeah. Electrical supply to the site,
Yeah.
and connection into the mains system, and then obviously all of the electrical systems throughout the building.
And any backup systems as well?
Mhm,
Yep.
mhm.
So, in conjunction with electrical engineering, you have to have a mechanical engineer for the mechanical services.
You sure do. So mechanical engineer is a completely different profession. Often you'll find an electrical and mechanical engineer will work together, or they may do both. But it is a profession all on its own, and I think we've got a couple of people in the room who have some past experience in mechanical design and construction.
What are some of the things that they take care of?
Lifts, services,
Lifts, a very good one, yeah. Air conditioning, yeah. What about heating? Who does the heating?
Yeah,
Mechanical
well,
engineer. We mightn't get them a lot in Darwin, but they definitely do. They do heating and cooling. So HVAC, I always forget what HVAC stands for.
heating, ventilation, and air conditioning.
Ventilation, air conditioning. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. So that's
Yeah.
really what they cover. But yeah, also lifts, anything sort of that has moving parts in it. Basically, the mechanical engineer will have a look at. Yeah, well, so sometimes windows are actually connected to your heating and cooling systems, and in larger buildings they could be. So when the air conditioning comes on, all the windows automatically close. When the air conditioning gets turned off, they open. You know, that sort of thing. So it can be quite complex. Okay, any more?
Well, how many more engineers are there? We've got some more?
It is. It is what, fire engineer?
Yeah, you can certainly have a fire engineer, yeah. So fire engineer is its own discipline. Fire engineer looks after the design of fire. So we have, in fire, we have passive systems and we have active systems. So your passive systems will be, have you provided enough stairwells to get everybody out in the event of a fire, and how many occupants are in the building, and travel distances to nearest exits. And then we have active systems which, require some maintenance, which we're thinking about the exit signs, but also things like sprinkler systems, all of your hydrants and supply systems that need to be tested. So fire has both. Alarm, yeah.
Control panels.
Yep.
Any more engineers? Safety engineer? Oh, that's a new one. Excellent. Well done. I don't think he's on our list.
You want to tell us about a safety engineer?
He must be aware about all the safety measures inside all the sites. And
Is this during design or construction?
the construction.
On construction side, yeah. Okay. Yep. So a safety engineer would probably work under the builder and the contractor as opposed to being part of the design team. But sometimes,
The fire and safety is combined.
it will be combined, because some of the safety measures will have to be considered during the design phase of the building.
Excellent.
Any others?
Any more engineers?
So we've got fire, we've got power. One really vital service for a building that we're missing here.
Sewage and water.
Water. What's he called? Or she? That person. What are they called? What kind of an engineer? Hydraulics engineer. Yeah, hydraulics.
Hydraulic.
But you've explained it perfectly. So they look after the water coming into the building. They look after the wastewater coming out of the building, but also the sewerage coming out of the building. So and they can work closely with the fire people to water supply to the fire hydrants and all of that as well. Yeah, very good.
Engineers, like you just mentioned before, some of them wouldn't necessarily be in on the first meeting, would they? They would come in under the project management.
Maybe.
The way I've experienced it, and I worked for a number of years with an engineering company, and this is exactly the way the design team would work. So the architect would come in, and the structural engineer would go into the meeting, and then they would discuss the preliminaries of the plans. And once the plans would get to about what we call 20% design, so you have something on paper, it looks like starting to look like you've got floor plans and elevations. Then all the service engineers, because remember the mechanical engineer, he's the one that comes in and says, I need this much space for the lift. I need this much space for my plant rooms. I need this much, and I need it here and here and here. So before you ever get the floor plan sorted out, you start getting input from all of these other engineers. Now I'm talking commercial buildings here. When we're looking at class 1 buildings, as we are today, you probably wouldn't have all these people working on there. In fact, on a class 1 building for a domestic house, you would probably replace the electrical engineer by the electrician who will do the actual work. He might have some input into the design team. So you would, on the side there, you'll have plumber, electrician. You won't have a fire engineer, you won't have a safety engineer, but you might have the guys who are actually going to come on site and do the work for you. You might get them involved in that design phase and ask them for their opinions on certain things. But on large design projects, I would say a maximum 20% of the design, you want to start bringing in your engineers and your team, your design team, and getting them together. So we generally, during the design phase of a large project, you have a design team meeting maybe weekly, maybe every 2 weeks, you know, and then everybody goes off and does their bit of the design, and they come back with, to the next meeting with all their issues that they've decided that they've come up with, and the design is changing and developing all the way through. But certainly they're designed. So the worst way you can design a building is that the architect designs it almost in its entirety, and he's really happy and the client's really happy, and they think they're almost finished, and then they send all those drawings out to all the engineers, and the engineers are just pulling their hair out going, I can't fit a lift in, I can't, you know, there's no room overhead for ducting for the mechanical systems, and, you know, there's all these issues, and then suddenly the design, basically you're starting all over again. You're just really redesigning. So you don't want that to happen. A good planned design team starts early on and gets everybody involved. Got a few other people. Any other?
Who does the geological side of things for bigger buildings? The geological surveys?
Engineer, yep.
So it's a land surveyor. So we've got a couple of different types of surveyors, and it's important that we don't get them mixed up. So we've got a land surveyor who does exactly what you said. So he goes out and takes the levels and takes the measurements of the land, everything to do with the land, and the soil capability tests that need to be. So you get your classification of your soil, so obviously the structural engineer will want to know that. But also you've got a civil engineer who looks after the civil engineer is more, he'll take the information from the land surveyor, and then the civil engineer will rework the levels and develop the site up to what it needs to be for the building to go on it. But also the civil engineer will look at all of the groundwork. So where are all these incoming services that need to go into the ground? How are he will coordinate all of that. Look at levels. Civil engineer will look at stormwater drainage. So, you know, we've huge drains in Darwin. In the NT, it's really big consideration on any site. You know, how are you going to deal with all this stormwater? And stormwater, you know, you might have, I'm sure CDU site has, you know, been native at one point, and the stormwater just dealt with itself and all ran towards the river, as nature tends to do. But once we start developing those sites, and, you know, look at the CDU site now with all the roads and all the bitumen and all the paving and all the buildings, once you start putting all that hard landscaping into one area, we concentrate the stormwater. So the stormwater can't seep into the ground anymore. It's got an impervious surface that it's landing on. It's now being collected and sent in one direction. So we've got this, we increase the volume of that stormwater quite dramatically when we develop sites. And so that's why we have a civil engineer who will look at all that and look at the rates of runoff and look at how that water is going to be diverted to, and it's always to a river or to some other larger water source, that we can do that. And there's also lots of things that they can do, like to slow down the rate of runoff, so that a huge volume of water doesn't all hit Rapid Creek right at the same time. We always have to try and minimise the rate of runoff they talk about.
Like subterranean, like that great big hole next to the cinema in Mitchell Street.
I'm not sure where the water goes in there. It must be pumped. That's all I can say. There's no, unless they just let it lie in there and seep through, but that would not be an engineered solution. That would be just what's happening. Yeah, it's a big concern. They may have to pump it to the stormwater system. They'll pump it up and in. Yeah. Yeah, they did. Yeah. Not sure if it's ongoing now.
I think it's just a redundant site now, the water just sits there.
Isn't there a tree in there using it all? It's fine. Yeah, there'll be a forest in there one day, and then, you know.
So a few other random ones I've got on the list here. Can anyone else offer up anything before I go through the list?
If you're thinking about a really big site, this is a bit outside of a Class 1 project, but if you're thinking about a really big site, it might change the access for people in cars and also the way pedestrians move around the site. So there might be somebody, is there a name for a person like that? Does anybody want to? Landscape architect is a bit different, but that's on the list.
Town planner.
Oh, yeah, that's something on the list. I'd be involved, yeah.
So a landscape architect looks after all things to do with how the site will be developed externally. So outside of the building, it's definitely a beautiful profession to be in, and I really think that our buildings should connect to our external spaces, especially somewhere tropical like Darwin. So it's really worth, on a commercial project, having a landscape architect, but also many of us build houses and don't consider the landscaping around them as they're being built, so it's really important. So again, instead of having a landscape architect on a dwelling house, you might just involve the person who's going to come and landscape the garden and get some design ideas for them, because it might change where you put the front door. It might change how you access the carport, you know, or where your driveway is going to go. So don't let the house dictate to the landscape always. They should be worked up together. So the landscape might also dictate to the building or the house, as the case may be.
Huge buildings like Stihl, the German
Yep.
tool manufacturer, they're really big in their warehouses and factories with the landscaping mitigating snow drift,
Yep.
dust flow.
Absolutely.
They put really clever design stuff in place to stop all those things being a problem. And
Yep.
natural solutions to
Yep.
their sites.
What I find in Darwin is that we tend to build driveways in concrete right up to our houses, and I know we need the termite treatment strip around them, but there are ways around that of like allowing some space for planter beds so that you can actually have some bushes and plants that will shade your walls. That's great in Darwin to be able to shade your walls, and we don't always have to do that by roof overhangs. We can do that with planting as well, but it does need to be considered, and you do need to allow the space for it before you start building and laying concrete that nobody really wants to come and dig up again, and it costs money.
And it makes a heat bank.
Yep.
Mm.
So the traffic engineer and town planner were mentioned there. Town planning we will discuss later today actually. We're going to have a good look at the Northern Territory Planning Scheme. But the town planners work for the local councils, or in the case of the Northern Territory, the NT government, have a planning department. And they're called the Development Consent Authority, the DCA, and they are, public servants, and you can contact them, you can go and have a meeting with them and discuss the requirements of the planning scheme with them during the design phase of the project. And applying for planning permission and planning consent is a big part of the design process. Usually happens, again, at that 20 or 30% design time. You don't want to go and design the whole building and have a whole set of working drawings and then realise that, the town planner doesn't agree with your design and isn't going to give you consent to build. So it's best done early in the project and get your consent and then move on to your working drawings after that. There's a big misconception outside of the industry, I'll say that the only consent you have to get is town planning, and once you get town planning you can just start building. And I've often seen people actually try and build a house off a set of planning drawings. Planning drawings are just there to get consent from the planning department. They're not meant to hand to a builder to build the building. It doesn't have enough detail at that stage. You're still very early in the design phase when you go for planning consent. So don't ever let a client tell you that he can build a house off the very schematic concept design floor plan that you've just drawn for him or her for planning consent. Not a good idea.
There are places that have got, like cultural limitations, like places where buildings have to be made of certain materials or certain styles. It's not such a problem in Australia, but
yeah, I've certainly worked in the UK. I worked for a huge housing developer in the UK he was building 5,000 houses a year all across the UK. It was huge. And we worked at every single different planning consent authority across the UK and Scotland and Wales. They just built all over the place. And so each of them would have their own criteria. So we would have the same house type, and then we would have different dressings or claddings. So in some places that same house set of plans would have a brick house, and the next consent authority we might have that same house plan, but it would have stone or different timber dressing on the front door. So we had to adapt each house type for each planning consent authority. So yes, definitely a thing. Not so much in Australia. We tend to be able to be quite flexible here, and I don't think the planning requirements in Australia aren't as onerous as they are in some other jurisdictions. They don't actually tell you have to build a brick house in Darwin or,
Some suburbs are.
Yeah, some suburbs are.
Design guidelines are a different thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So the traffic engineer kind of ties in with planning, and generally where I've seen traffic engineers on projects is because when you've gone for planning consent, they've said to you, oh, we want a traffic study. So another project I worked on was the service station, it's quite new on the Stewart Highway coming out of the city, in Pratt there. Don't know what brand that is.
Oh yeah, where the tyre place used to be.
Yeah, so it's right on the junction with the traffic lights, and you know, you can come out onto are we on Prop Road there, or no, Ross Smith Avenue,
Yeah.
and so a whole traffic study had to be done there, and it involved, you know, how many times the lights turn red, and how at what time of the day is the queue of traffic right back to the other set of lights, and are people who are going to be stopping it to turn into the service station going to hold up all of the set of lights behind, and those are the sort of things that the traffic engineers will do. They'll talk about slip lanes and whether you require one or you don't require one, and all of those things.
Maybe put a slip line in the Ross Smith.
Yeah, this is part of the study. Are people going to start using it to get around the lights? Yes, they do, and that has to be.
Absolutely, yep.
You do.
And the Shell back up on Daly Bridge, I'll use that one there if I have to.
To get around the lights. So all of that is part of a traffic study, and working out car parking requirements on larger projects too is part of a traffic study.
Have you been into that service station? Did you notice the fault, which seems to be with, there's one real bad one in the service station. You drive in and you've got to turn to get into the Bowsers. They're not
straight on.
They're straight onto the building.
Yeah.
Diagonal as you run in.
Oh,
That
okay.
one's not so bad. There is one somewhere. When you leave the Bowser, there is no room because of the building and the parked cars.
Okay, yeah.
To negotiate your way out.
Mm.
If you put in the end. But that one there's got a bit more space. But to go to the tyre area, got to go across. So it's not, the design of that could have been a little bit better.
Better, yeah, sure they could. And the last thing the people who own the Bowsers want is for people to be blocking up their Bowsers, because, you know, they just want to get as much cars through and as much sales as possible. They certainly don't want any traffic issues on the forecourt. Shall we have a 15-minute morning tea break, and we'll come back and finish this off just straight after? In the meantime, if you can think of any more, there are a few others that we'll talk about after. Okay, so we're going to continue on with our discussion about members of the design team. Has anybody had any more suggestions over the break?
I was thinking maybe project manager or something?
Project managers.
Part of the contractors team?
So there's two kinds. So I used to be a project manager, but I was a project manager called a manager, okay? And that meant I was a project manager in the design phase of the project. And I worked on behalf of the clients, and I was the person who put the design team together on behalf of the client. Sometimes the clients do that by themselves. And I would coordinate between all the different engineers and all the different information coming in, and make sure that information got to the right person, and made sure that we had programs set out for the deadlines of when documentation needed to be at certain stages. So I would say certain dates, set dates, and say documentation needs to be at 20%, and then when everyone sent it to me at 20%, I would make sure it got sent back out to everybody else, and made sure that we had meetings with town planners set up, and all of those things. So worked on behalf of the client throughout the design phase of the project, and managed the tender phase and on to construction documentation. There is also a project manager who works on behalf of the contractor, and that project manager manages the building site, basically, you know. So it's site manager. It's really a site manager, but they're often referred to as project managers. And they will coordinate all the subcontractors who will work on the site, and they will coordinate the scheduling of the building process on site. So there's two different kinds of project managers. I'll refer to the other one as a site manager.
What's the difference between a site manager and a foreman?
Nothing. Foreman was the older term for it, really, and usually referred to when it's a smaller site.
Okay.
And then as we get up with the bigger sites, they're generally referred to as site manager.
Yeah.
Or site supervisor.
Okay. Site engineer.
Site engineer can be called. You're referring to a site engineer as in the project manager, site manager? Yeah, can be referred to a site engineer, yeah.
What about
Yeah.
the client themselves?
Sorry?
The client themselves?
The client themselves can or may not be part of the design team. When I did a lot of client-based project management, the client didn't come to the design team meetings. I went on their behalf. Sometimes clients don't have time. Like if you have a client like the NT government, they don't want to be at every design team meeting. They want one person to be reporting back to them on how the design is progressing. And they have certain benchmarks in the project where they want to see documentation and they want to have input. But I often work for like clients like, say, the Salvation Army want a new warehouse. Well, there's nobody who works for the Salvation Army that A, knows a lot about the buildings, or B, or the building industry, or B, has the time to put into this design development part of the project. So you would just take the brief from them and work on their behalf then to make sure that that brief was met. And also, of course, go back to them with questions with if there was design decisions being made around the functionality of the spaces and how they would use them. But they don't want to be at every design team meeting. They don't have the time or the want to do that. It's very different.
Very different, yeah.
Yeah, well, residential.
Sometimes you don't
people's
want
own
them at the
homes.
meetings, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. There's that as well. when it's people and it's their homes and they're going to live in it and they know how they want to use it, so they want to be at all these design team meetings and fully take part and be involved in the decisions when it comes to the larger commercial buildings. That person doesn't really exist, you know. You maybe for a school you might have the principal at some of the design team meetings. She probably won't make half of them. She's a busy lady or gentleman, you know, and she won't be able to, or be available to be there. So somebody will represent the school, or you will just compile a list of questions and go back via email or something in her own time or his own time. They'll respond to you. But yeah, quite often the client isn't represented at the actual meetings.
What's the frequency of a design team
Meeting?
meeting?
On larger projects, weekly, depending on how fast moving that design process is, but weekly or bi-weekly is common.
Yeah, right. Not just an initial planning phase.
No. You want to see every stage of that design and how it's moving forward. Yeah. And we always talk about that 10%, 20% design, 30% design. We'll meet next week, we'll be at 40%, you know. You have your 40% drawings ready. You know, everybody has to issue drawings, always issuing drawings just before the design team meeting, because everybody wants the newest, latest drawings on the desk when they're discussing things. So that's very another big part of the process, to have those benchmarks. Okay, where was I? Anyone else? I think the other one that I don't see on there is the quantity surveyor. Can anyone tell me what a quantity surveyor does?
Bearings and distance of the actual parcel land itself.
No, this is a different kind of surveyor. So we talked about the land surveyor, who's a site surveyor.
You're going to need
Quantity.
bricks.
You're going to need 18 million bricks.
That's
Yeah,
him.
you count all of the materials that go into the project, and not just the materials, it's also the labour to construct those projects. And they will give you an estimated cost of the project. Quite important. Even for a Class 1 building. Look, at the way most Class 1 buildings are commissioned is that, Kissy and I are getting married and we're going to set up a house, aren't we? And we've decided we want a brand new house. What's our options? Can anyone tell me, what's your options in Darwin? You decide you need a house. No, I don't mean about the design of the house. What's your who will you go to next? So we could go to an architect. If we've got lots of money, we can go to an architect. We can buy a site, go to an architect. Yeah.
Completely non-compliant, yeah.
We could go to a building designer.
Ruin your marriage.
Or we could go to a builder. We can go directly to the builder. So all of our house builders in Darwin all have a drafting service. And they will. Most of the builders in Darwin actually have house types that they like to build. They've built them before, and you can go to them and you can look at that house and say, I like it, but I want the living room a bit bigger, or I like it, but I want an extra bedroom at the back. And they'll adjust their drawings, and they will modify it and make it suitable for your particular site. It's a little bit, how do I say this? It's the dollars and cents of how to design a house. Because obviously it saves you all of the fees that you pay for the whole design team, but it will, so you're going directly to the builder and he's going to do everything for you. Do you think the builder's working in your best interest? What's his main priority? Make money. Make money. So he wants to charge you X amount for the house, and he wants it to cost him X minus 20%, and he wants to keep the 20% because that's his living, that's his income. So you. Yeah, well, of course, yeah. And then there's the owner-builder option, of course. You can design and build yourself. So I suppose the high-quality, top end of the market is to go to an architect, fully qualified architect, and do now. So most architects won't design you a house unless you have a site, because remember last week we talked about all of the things that a site gives you, all the parameters it gives you for the design, and then the architect will work with that and design the best house for that site and for you, but primarily for the site, because the house will last a lot longer than you will, hopefully. So houses go with sites. And then in the middle of the road is sort of the building designers and the draft person who have a little bit of design experience or knowledge. They've got a lot of technical knowledge and how it all goes together. They'll take all the influences of the site and they will put the house together. I've never seen this in Australia, but have you ever seen a book of house plans? Just a book. You used to be able to buy these in Ireland when I was growing up, off the shelves in the news agency, and you literally could go shopping for a house. It was a bit like getting the Kmart catalogue and buying a new jumper. You could just pick a house.
You go to those awful places, like GJ Gardner or the House Off the Rack.
House Off the Rack. They've got books, and most house builders have sheets of loose pieces of paper with house plans on there. And that's kind of what you're doing if you do that. You're buying off the shelf. And then you will go, and the builder might have a few sites for sale, or you could go to some of the new suburbs and select a site. But actually, you're buying off the shelf, and you're going to take this and you're going to put it here, and then you're going to maybe edit it a little bit just to make it fit around that site. Not the ideal design process. However, the other option is to spend lots of money and do a full design process, and you have lots of input into that. But yeah, as I said, as a client with people's own dwellings, then that's what they do. But I suppose it's the same thing. If you go to a builder and you get some adjustments made to that plan, it's one step up from just going and buying a house that's already built, that you don't have any design input into it all, and you just buy it because it's already in bricks and mortar, and you're just going to move in.
But they're probably just like designer input or like anything at
Yeah.
all. So
Nothing.
Even if they do make the living room bigger or the walking room of large size, it's still kind of the same.
It's kind of the same. Yeah. I was recently involved in the HIA judging for House of the Year for Darwin. Did I say the story last week? And I went around a lot of houses in Zuccoli on the same day. And by the end of the day, I actually really struggled to tell the difference between all of the houses I'd been to. I had to actually sit down when I went home that night and go, oh yes, that was that one, because they're so similar. They're so similar. But that's how they make them affordable. Yeah. Because they're so similar. Back in Europe, back in Ireland where I come from, they built whole housing estates. So you get exactly the same house 50 times in the one estate. And if you want to buy a house at that price, that's what you do. And your neighbour's house is exactly maybe a mirror image of yours, but it's exactly the same. That's how we get affordability in the market. It's not affordable for everyone to go to an architect and design a house and buy a nice site and plan it all out. That's not affordable. Design costs, the cost of this design team, if you're looking at all these people, is estimated to be about 20% of the build cost. Now, we don't pay that to builders when we go to them and buy a house off their set of plans. We're nowhere near that. Absolutely nowhere near that. It's almost just incorporated into the cost of the building, but they're not charging you 20%. If you go to an architect,
getting anything for you 20%.
Oh, but you are. Please don't underestimate the value of our profession. This is our fees. Yeah.
I'm saying when you're buying off the they're still charging you that.
They're saving that and making it affordable. They're keeping the 20% for themselves. Yeah, but that's to build profit as well, and that's kind of standard for the industry. But yeah, about 20% for the design team, and I totally think the design team deserve every cent of it. They do a lot of hard work in the initial stages of design for 20%, but you'll have a lot of people saying, you know, I don't see this 20% in bricks and mortar. I'll happily pay that 20% for all my windows because I can see them and feel them and I'm going to use them, but I don't see this 20% that's just gone on fees. David?
So who would do the original, say off the rack, by design, who would do the original design? And if there was a designer, do they get a cut from selling each?
No. So if you go to work for a builder, which some of you may do, you will be the draftsperson in their office. They own the plans, not the person who draws them, it's the person who's commissioned them and paid you to draw them. And they own that set of plans, and they tend to. I did ask a builder, one of the house builders recently, I said, so, you know, he's a reasonable turnover of drafting staff over the last number of years and, you know, had some high qualified people in there with lots of, they'd come from interstate, so I would have thought they'd have lots of different influences. And I said, oh, so has your set of house plans evolved and really changed with each different drafting person you've had in? They said, oh yeah, they improve all the time. So they fine-tune them all the time. Like, I do see value in that. When I worked and I worked in the design office for that huge house builder in the UK, the detail for each house is really well worked out. Because, you know, if you're building the same house over and over again, you find the flaws very quickly and you make sure they're ironed out before the next time you build them. So it does become a very well-refined house. Because it's been done multiple times, but it doesn't give the design choice back to the client. You're just buying off the shelf. So that sort of setup, going to a builder, basically cuts out the whole design team. You just go straight to the builder. Yeah.
They would only have to pay like a one-off for the design of the house, wouldn't they?
They really don't pay. It's never identified that you ever pay for the design of the house.
No, because they got like you said, they got the whole book of house design already made.
Yeah.
So it's a one-off payment and then.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just part of the cost of your house. They're going to build a house for you, so part of that overall, you know, $350,000 that you're going to give them goes towards the bit of drafting that's done. But it's quite an easy piece of drafting to do because you've already got a set of plans, elevation sections. All you have to do is put that on the site, make it fit, and then, you know, do some minor adjustments to it. Yeah. And there's probably a whole set of structural engineering done for that house. So, you know, you're not paying that again. It's already there. It's already a stamped set of drawings that's available to the builder. Apart from the foundations, because they might vary per site. Who else? Lisa, we said the quantity surveyor, so he's all about the costings. I don't know where my list has gone now.
Yeah.
There's a few more. Here we are.
Yeah, that's him.
So acoustics engineer, as in acoustics. So acoustics engineer becomes quite, you know, important on larger buildings. We don't want sound travelling, so this is not quite classroom. You know, if we had in schools, especially if you've got the PE hall right next door to the classroom, you want to make sure that the sound from the PE lesson isn't interfering with the sound next door of the teacher teaching the class, or even in attached housing. So in apartment buildings and unit developments where, you know, you've got a common wall, a party wall between two dwellings, you don't want sound travelling through, right? You know, I really not want to hear my neighbour on the toilet in the morning, you know, and things like that. So, and this has been a huge issue. I know in the housing estates they've built back in Ireland, where sometimes the party wall is plasterboard, you know, timber frame construction and plasterboard, and they didn't put the insulation in between. Literally, you can hear the husband and wife next door and, you know, what they're arguing about over tea tonight, you know, so people don't want to hear that from their neighbours. You've got to look at how we soundproof our buildings from each other. Yeah, they're supposed to be firewalls, they're supposed to be solid construction, but you can do firewalls with plasterboard. You can do a couple of layers of plasterboard. It doesn't have to be blockwork. Yeah. So that's what they've done, but they haven't put in the insulation for the soundproofing in between when the sound is travelling. Geotechnical engineer, we kind of touched on earlier. So the geotech, we did talk about them earlier. We have them already up there, covering the same thing twice. Network systems engineer is on this. I don't know what a network systems engineer is.
The internet is vital.
This is Lisa's.
No internet,
This is Lisa's.
I'm out.
Oh,
About the internet.
so
What do I call them? Network services.
comms, yeah, comms engineer. That's what you mean.
New houses with everything that's all hooked up to the one thing, and then you see it on Grand Designs all the time. They're all covered with the
bus.
internet.
Yeah.
Oh, the building management systems. Yeah, that's always fun.
BMS, building management systems. Yeah, like commercial buildings quite often have them. They have a little wheelhouse, I suppose you could call it, in the building somewhere, and it controls everything from there. Less common in dwelling houses, but yeah, Grand Designs, architecture
And that
design homes. with lots
Hastings on Mindle has it. The apartment
Oh,
complex
yes,
that
yeah, apartments.
the Osborne family holdings built. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's it got?
Building management system controls the HVAC and internet and how lighting's managed, and everything's all systematic, and you get a little panel with feedback and shows you your use and consumption, and we've got a lot of reticulated systems where you might use the heat out of one service to heat up the water on another service. I mentioned that last week. So just the different ways that the systems work together. It's quite advanced, actually, apparently. I haven't investigated it myself, but I've heard good things.
Yeah, I've seen it on a few bigger houses where, like, things like, solar panels, and then they'll have the Tesla battery backup, and then, when does that operate your electrical system, and when do you get power from the main system, and who decides all this on a daily basis? Well, the computer is there, and it's got set to different systems and default systems to do that. But it's a building management system, and it's where computers are going to be running our buildings and managing them. Probably much better than we do.
A bit of a fallacy.
The ones are a lot better than the ones 10 years ago.
6 months old is too old for IT, so 10 years, yeah, definitely.
Because when they first opened the control tower at the airport, the one they're using now, they couldn't open it on time because of the BMS.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
BMS systems, in my experience, need lots of commissioning. So when that building is ready to go and you've got your occupancy permit, nobody should move in there for another 2 months until they've tried out all the systems and had everything operational and coming on, turning off, different times of the day. Commissioning is yeah. When computers go wrong. Yeah.
Security.
Yeah, commissioning is an actual phase, an actual construction phase for complex buildings. So after the construction's finished, we're entering the commissioning phase. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then that's all about sorting out those things before the building is being used. Yeah.
Anything else on that?
There's one other really important person on the list. I think we touched on this last week. So the building certifier, also sometimes known as a building surveyor. So he's up there. Please, can someone tell me what he does? What does he inspect for?
Making sure everything is
The NCC. Yeah, the National Construction Code, the NCC. So that is his entire job. The building certifier is to make sure that you are compliant with the regulations, like our pyramid before. These are mandated regulations, and he must sign off on the building. So we talked a little bit about the defects liability period. So the builder has 1 year, and we often do an inspection after 1 year of use of the building, and the builder has to come back after that 1 year to do the defects liability period, and fix any little, errors that are there in the building. The certifier, when he signs the occupancy permit, he basically takes a lot of the responsibility. So if, like that example I gave earlier of the stairs, if somebody along the design team has made that stairs too steep and somebody falls over 3 years later and falls down the stairs, it comes back to the building certifier, because he was the one who was supposed to go out and measure that all of those threads were consistent and that they all met requirements. So the building certifier probably has or takes on at completion or at the end of construction, he takes on more responsibility than almost anyone else in that design team. He gets the forms from all of these engineers, the structural engineer, the electrical engineer, the electrician who's installed the electrical works. He gets a certificate from each of those people. He collects them all up and they say, my bit of the job was done right. I did that right. That's all done in compliance. But he relies on all those certificates and then he signs off on the entire building. And also a certificate, a declaration from the builder to say that he built everything in accordance with the NCC as per the drawings. But after that, the certifier takes it all together and he signs the occupancy permit. And at that point, he takes responsibility for all of those design and construction issues.
To certify he works for the government, he or she works for the government, or is it a public, private?
Normally they do. They work for councils in most of the states and territories in Australia, but in the Northern Territory it's slightly different. They are all privatised here. So you do. It is a private contract between you and your certifier. It's a licensed occupation, so you do need to have qualifications and experience to be a certifier.
And insurance.
And lots of insurance, because obviously if something is wrong with that building from a design or sometimes construction perspective, as a certifier you will be sued. You will be the person who will be sued because you signed the occupancy permit.
They can lose their job over certain things, like I know
go to jail.
Can lose their
Yeah, no, certifiers can certainly lose their job. Like there's a certifier has just been suspended for 2 years in the Northern Territory for an issue that went on the construction site.
So have you got different classes in the building certified, like one just does the domestics?
Sometimes, yes, they do have different restrictions. Commercial, yeah. And of course, because it's private, they can pick and choose what projects they take on themselves too. They don't have to take on a project. Yeah.
Has everybody got this all written down?
So that's our design team. Any further questions on design team or the design process, I suppose? That was a really good session on how it all works.
Is there a light engineer?
Lighting, electrical. Electrical engineer covers lighting. Yeah.
You can have consultants.
Yeah.
Do that next.
Lighting is actually a really complex area. When you get into commercial buildings, it's really, really complex. So, yeah, but mostly electrical engineers will look at that. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And it's funny, interior design. And then external lighting is huge these days as well, about how does that building look at night. And, if you go to any major cities, you see really buildings that are used quite as a lot of advertising space, but also as nice facades at night time as well as during the day. Yeah. Oh, amazing, yeah. It's a very interesting area. So this is actually a really good recap from what we looked at last week, because I think that's been really good to go through that. Our next topic. Next topic we're going to go on to is we're going to discuss the locally approved authorities which are relevant to building projects. So we looked a little bit about this last week. So again, I'm going to ask for your assistance here. So what departments, or especially let's start with the government departments, who might we be speaking to do with our building?
What if you were designing and building a childcare centre for a government office? So the NT government says we need another childcare centre on CDU property. They'd be the client, the government. But who else would we need to talk to, apart from all those design team people? What approved authorities or who do you think would be interested or invested in that project? Thinking about the occupants, the people who are going to use the building, the childcare centre. No? Department of Education?
Probably an excellent one, yeah. So that would cover both childcare centres, kindergarten, schools, high schools even, yep.
So not only will they be commissioning the building, but they may also have a lot of policy documents of their own that will influence the design.
Can you think of anybody else that might be interested in a childcare centre if that was the project? Absolutely. Well done, Will.
Yeah, so health get involved in not only childcare centres, but quite obviously hospitals and clinics. But also, like, one that popped up for me recently, and I was kind of going, oh, why are they interested, was a cafe in a demountable in Catherine that I was applying for planning for. And suddenly, when you apply for planning, the planning department send out letters to all other departments that might be interested or have something to say about this. And so I got a letter back from the health department, and they were asking me about how I was going to treat the waste from a kitchen, which has its own name, you know, where it's got oil and all in it, and they were wanting to know about the grease trap and how I was going to capture the oil and all of that. Yeah.
That would have been,
Children's services?
that would have been discussed.
Oh, that's a separate, we'll come back to that one. What else was there?
The church?
Is that like a primary school in Bucoli? There's no one approved by government or something?
Well, sometimes they can be government, sometimes they can be church-based. So there's what do they call it, the Catholic Education Department. They have their own thing, don't they? They even have their own
Catholic NT, I think, yeah.
So that instead of it being a government one,
Yeah, because it's, I think, anything to do with religion, it cannot be like
it's a
part
separate
of
thing.
Australia government.
Is that,
No.
would St. John's be?
Yes, yeah. So you have a lot of the private schools. Yeah. They're more the client though. They probably bring up their own brief, but when we think about the Department of Education, they would have actual policy around the design.
So the Department of Child Services. Or Family Services, depending on which government calls which thing which.
What if we were building a pub?
What would the child services stake in approving?
So it's about security, basically. It's about protection of the occupants while they're there, making sure they can't escape, or people who are outside can't get in. So they're probably mostly interested with the way the structure works for security. And then there's the extra stuff like privacy and health and all the rest of it. So it just depends on who it's to.
So sometimes these departments have operational aspects. You know, for instance, like at a childcare centre, they have the double gate system, but that's an operational thing. You know, so that a child can't, you know, if somebody leaves one gate open, the child can't run out, and there's a safety issue and all the rest of it. It's an operational aspect, but it has implications for how we construct the building. So we have to investigate all these operational aspects and make sure that they're part of our brief as well.
What would you do? A pub?
Yeah, what if we built a pub? We could all just go there. Who might be interested in that though? Who might have something to say?
Health and safety.
Generic thing?
Yeah.
What is it, liquor licensing?
Liquor licensing, because you need a license for that premises to serve alcohol. So liquor licensing will be there, and they will have again their own set of documents.
The Department of Fun and No Fun. There's gambling and guns as well, isn't it?
Gambling, liquor, tobacco.
Oh yeah, tobacco. That's the other one. Yeah.
Department of Gambling and also liquor license is part of the initial designing process.
Well, I'll give you an example. If you design a public house pub, and you want to have kids meals, you want to have an area that's good for families, as pubs often do, and a little playroom off to the side. However, in the middle of that design, you have all those families entering that building and they're walking straight through the gambling area, which is not allowed to be over 18s. That's a design error. That's going to have major implications for how that building operates, and you've implications for the business as well. So this is why you need to be aware of the restrictions and design around that.
Sometimes it's about when people leave all at once in the middle of the night, like 3 o'clock when closing, and a lot of people exit the building together, and they want to make sure that it's not a bottleneck, as well as for fire safety, but also for the way that it can access vehicles and taxis and disperse quickly. They want to be able to make sure
It's
that
for
it's gonna
noise
be safe.
pollution and
Yeah.
also, you know, for just crime and violence, and you know, you don't want people having bust up.
No, not so much zoning, because that'd come early in the piece and be before you spoke to these guys. But they would want to have a look at the
You want to
design.
make sure you're right.
Yeah, that will already have been taken care of, presumably. But they'll also just want to look at the way it operates. Yeah.
NT Police might want a little bit of a say in this.
What's the safety governing body of you?
NT Workspace.
Yeah.
NT Workspace. Yeah.
What about our services? Who provides our services in the NT? Power Water. Power Water are often a company that you will speak to and need to consult with during the design phase. What about, I'm thinking more something that's quite prevalent in the NT, sacred sites and heritage buildings, and if we think along those lines, who might we need to talk to there? So we've got the Aboriginal Area Protection Authority, got the Northern and Central Lands Council, and we've also got the Environmental Protection Agency. So if you're ever considering a site that's very near a wetlands, which again we have lots of, or a flood-prone area, it's really important that we're not contaminating those types of sites. So Environmental Protection Authority are often consulted on wastewater, sewage disposal, risk involved with leakages, or, you know, for instance, if you've got a pump system, what happens if the pump doesn't work one day? What happens if the cyclone comes through and there's no power and the pump's not working? Do we just have a big pollution, you know, spill, and is that just an environmental risk? You know, what they want to know about the contingencies if your building has implications for that.
What department make sure you've got all the correct access and services to disability?
The building certifier is the person who checks for that. However, it's not under the NCC. It's a really good, interesting question, this. So a couple of years ago, there was another document whose name I won't remember correctly. It was, I think it's the Disability Act. Don't quote me on that, but there's a name for that. And so the Disability Act changed, and it stated that persons with disability could not be disadvantaged by not being able to enter a public building. And not only that, it goes way further than that and says, you know, they can't just not enter the building, but they have to be able to enter through the front door like everybody else, and they have to, it's about equality. So it came in, and it came in under the building certifier's role, that they were the people who were going to look after this legislation. But if you don't comply with that, not only, it's not that you haven't met the building regulations, you're actually committing an offence under the Disability Act, and you're discriminating. And you can get sued for that. Yeah. So it's a discrimination law as opposed to a building regulation. But as you're right, it's overseen by the building certifier. And they have no, with the NCC, and we'll talk about this later in the day, there's a couple of different ways you can comply with the NCC, and some of them can be somewhat discretionary to the building certifier. But compliance with the Disability Act, it has no discretion whatsoever. You must comply. The building certifier does not have any way of allowing you not to comply with that.
Is that retroactive?
Sorry?
Is that retroactive or retrospective?
No. Just.
You're all good if it's an old building.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
As long as you don't change anything. So we
Yeah.
probably should have added the access consultant to the other list.
Mm-hmm.
They can often be involved with the specialised profession of people who are really good at that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you asked me was that retrospective, it does make me, it's not simple as it's not, but I do know there was a building here at the university a couple of years ago, and they wanted to enclose a balcony. So I think this balcony was on the first floor of one of the buildings, and they wanted to enclose a balcony to extend the office space. So the Disability Act states that you have to have access to all areas, all working areas for the person with a disability from the front entrance. So not only would the new room and the new works have to comply and be accessible, but all of the corridors right back to the main entrance would have to have been widened to allow to comply and to get to that new space, and that wasn't doable, and the project didn't go ahead for that reason. Yeah. So when you say retrospective, it does any new part of the building maybe have some implications on the existing building.
Yeah, I think it's not Australia, I'm pretty sure it was California. There's a group of, I can't remember what they call themselves, but they were guerrilla disabled people in wheelchairs that were getting around places and confronting shops, like trying to get in, couldn't get in, so they fall out onto the steps and crawl up, go up to the managers and wave pieces of paper in front of their faces.
Wow.
Yeah. To be doing
Well, the risk we run as designers is that if any person with any disability makes a complaint about discrimination following the design of your building, then that will be taken very seriously and it'll be fully investigated. It's not the same as not complying with the NCC. So we've also got a few others. Department of Mines and Energy. Perhaps, if we were going out, we do have lots of mine sites and all that around here. I've never had any experience. I can't give you an example of that. Do you, Lisa?
No.
Never had to deal with the Department of Mines and Energy.
I'm thinking about the workers' villages mostly, where
Right.
we've got demountable accommodation, and then there's recreation facilities and food and showering and pollution blocks and things like that. Yeah, so they set up like a whole temporary town on site for big projects.
And I suppose I do have some experience in that. Is a mining company or these construction workers who used to always work out on mines, and they set up these like huge cranes, gantry cranes, you know, to do precast concrete, and they wanted to put one. You can actually still see it. It's out in Burma, and they were building one in town, and I was doing a planning application for them, and during that process in the early part of the design, I said to them, "You do know you need a building permit for this?" And they went, No, we don't. No, you do. It's a structure and it's in the building control area in Darwin. And they said, "Oh no, we've never needed one on any other mine we've ever built one on." No, well, you wouldn't. But you're now in Darwin and you do need one. So that's the other side of it. So people who are used to working out in unrestricted building areas and suddenly they come into town to do something similar don't realise that they have to go through all the same hoops that we do. And they often will say, "But it's only a demountable. It doesn't need to comply." Yes, it does.
Demountables fly away in cyclones just as quick and easy as anything else.
And they still need wheelchair access.
Yeah.
And they still need all of the other facilities. They still need X amount of, you know, sanitary facilities, toilets and all the rest of it for the workers. They need to have car parks for planning. So yes, once you're building in the building zone, it all applies. It doesn't matter that your whatever your project is going to only be there for 2 years. It's irrelevant.
Defence and or airspace.
So if the airport,
Great. Yes, fantastic. We were just getting that. So civil aviation and the Defence Department are quite often consulted on various projects. So I've worked and done a number of projects at Burma Business Park, which is quite close to the airport, which is in Darwin, is a defence, probably wrong on this, Nick, you might be able to correct me, but a RAF airport. So completely controlled by Department of Defence, and you do need to talk to them if you, for instance, if your building's got some external lighting that you'd like to light up your big neon sign at night, the Civil Aviation Authority may tell you can't do that. You're going to distract our pilots trying to land their planes, and you're not going to do that in Burma Business Park. So it's a little bit restrictive like that.
In a RAF, even more so.
Yes.
A lot of people complain when they move into the flight path that the plane is still taking off at 3 in the morning. They write letters in the RAF to tell them to move.
Yeah, don't live there if you don't like it. Yeah. So I have this thing, and I totally, and it's kind of like what we talked about at the pub before too. If you're the kind of person who's going to complain about the noise at midnight when people are leaving the pub, don't buy an apartment above one. There are lots of places you can go and live. And if you're the kind of person who's going to complain about the flight noise at 3 a.m., don't live beside the airport. It's your choice where you live. it's not really, we have to have these other activities going on for, you know, complete and full society, and the choice is about where you live, is much more flexible than where the planes land. So.
The other thing you have to watch out for sometimes is you're building a very tall building in where the airplanes are in sort of mid-takeoff or descent, so not right near the airport, but in the flight path further down a little way. So the Evolution building in the city had to get special permits from Civil Aviation to have the cranes at the top because they were actually in the same airspace as aeroplanes. It's about making sure that you're not too close, and also about, once the building has been commissioned, about having lighting on the top. So you'll notice there's red lights that come on where there needs to be an antenna might need to be highlighted, or a building might need to be highlighted, so that pilots can see the heights of the obstacles so they don't bump into it.
You should watch YouTubes of the old Hong Kong airport. Planes are literally meters away from the...
Yikes.
It's scary.
That's scary.
Fancy living there anyway.
Yeah.
just for your
It would vibrate the whole building,
Yeah.
Like living next to a railroad tracks or
Yeah.
train station would be tough too.
Yeah. Oh, but lots of people do.
Mm.
Lots and lots of people do all over the world.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
yeah. What about fire? Who might you talk to about fire regulations? The Great Fire of London, when all the buildings were built so close together, the whole city burnt down. It's just spread from one to the other. So fire isn't just about the individual building, it's about what's next to it and separation distances and all the rest of it. So we've got NT Fire Rescue Service, NT FRS. So again, the Building Certifier will send a copy of your documents to NT FRS, and they will do a full and complete compliance check for their requirements on your set of drawings, and they will come back with feedback. That happens quite late in the design. It's usually about 80 or 90%. They want to see most things worked out, and they also want to know about the sprinkler systems and the hydrant systems and all of the complex systems that may not happen until the end of the working drawings are complete. So they want to see all that information, and you send it to them, and you really hope and pray that they don't have anything major to say, because it's very late in the day to have major changes if they need to occur. So yeah, it's one of those things you need to work out with your building certifier or your fire engineer early in the day and be compliant. And the other one I've got on here is the National Trust. Anyone know what they do?
Yeah. My wife's mum works for them.
Oh.
They go and certify heritage buildings and make sure that places stay in keeping in the style, or don't change the facade and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
She manages all of the manors and the mansions in Victoria.
Oh, fantastic job.
Like when Werribee Mansion went to change some stuff, that to make sure that all of the new railings and fixtures and stuff are within keeping with style and so on.
Yep.
That would be really challenging to try and keep a heritage building compliant with
Current
accessibility and just really difficult, expensive.
Landscaping comes into it.
Yes, it would.
Because dirt looks
It's got to have the right
like
dirt.
dirt.
Wow.
But you can't have, like obviously you couldn't have Art Deco rails going up to a building.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you just put dirt in.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Dirt was like dirt.
Mm.
Good to go. Dirt's
Yeah,
always
right.
been there.
Never ages. There you go.
Yeah. So we don't have a huge amount of heritage buildings in Darwin. There's some around the CBD area. There's lovely stone buildings that we have up around Parliament House. There are old buildings here. So we don't come across this a huge amount here. I do know the planning application that's on the opposite wall there for the Waterfront Hotel, the proposal that's just gone in, they had some consultation with Heritage, because it's obviously one of the oldest precincts in Darwin down on the waterfront, and they've got the old World War II oil tunnels there, and which is all part of our heritage. It's not just the beautiful picturesque buildings, it's also the history of an area, and you don't just want to build over that, and so that, coupled with our Aboriginal culture and sacred sites, just one thing to be looking out for if you're developing new sites, and depending on where they're located. And again, so a lot of these departments will be directly contacted when you apply for a planning application. So I think that's what a lot of people don't realise. It's not just the town planner. You don't just hand the documents to the town planner and they say, oh yeah, it complies with the clauses of the planning scheme. Done. It's not just about complying with the clauses of the planning scheme, it's also about the planner will send on the application to all of these No, not all of them. They'll send them to the appropriate ones for that application, but they can send them to any one of these and ask them for comment, and they will come back with comments. And it's really good, I suppose, to have them involved at that early planning stage, and you iron out any issues that they may have at that early stage of a planning consent.
Will the council be on that list as well?
Oh yes, sorry, the local council. Yeah, well spotted. Thank you for that. So Darwin City Council, Palmerston City Council, if you're out that way. So what sort of things would they jump up in arms about?
Well, that's beyond the access. Look, they probably cover the health, work safety and things like that. But they used to run the permits.
What kind of permits?
Well, you know, for your traffic control and your parking and street parking and stuff. So.
Yes, yeah. So they basically control the street and the nature strip, footpaths, and obviously your crossover then, so where your driveway comes out across the nature strip to you, get your car to the road. David?
Do town planners work okay?
No, not in Darwin. They work for the NT government. So the town planners in Darwin are called the Development Consent Authority, and they work for NT government. They're NT government employees, not Darwin City Council. So we have, I always mix these two up, the Development Consent Authority, and then we have what's the actual department called? GCA, and we'll look at this website later on. I'll get the terminology right for you. So Darwin City Council, then, there is a board that makes the final decision on planning applications. So the Development Consent Authority are the planners, expertly trained professional planners, and they look at the planning application and compare it to the planning scheme and say it's compliant, and then they make a recommendation for consent to be granted or consent not to be granted, or for further information to be sought from the client to the authority. Now the authority has a chairperson, and it usually has about 6 members. They sit once a month. Your planning application will go before them, and on that committee are 2 members of the local council. So there'll be 2 representatives from Darwin City Council. So they do have a little bit of influence. But your planning application will also be sent to the technical people at Darwin City Council for comment, and that's to do with things like crossovers and, you know, they look after the lighting on the streets, obviously, if you're going to interfere with where their light poles are or something like that. Fencing, they can be a little bit involved with as well.
Good practice is to try, particularly in the CBD, is to try to think about how your building project will affect pedestrian access to the CBD. So it's about shading and weatherproofing the footpath around the CBD. So it might be up to the project itself to create an awning out over the walkways that pedestrians use. Otherwise, they're open to the elements. So the council will appreciate that because the project is then taking care of the CBD pedestrians. So what now?
The RSL, they put the sea containers in just because walking on Friday.
Oh, okay, the walkway through while
Yeah,
construction's
the
being
full
done after it's
ramps,
burnt.
Sea containers, so they're
right.
covered over the top. They cut away walls, so you still got access to the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and most cities all over the world will have this, but this is just temporary access to the footpath during construction. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Protection from impact.
And protection from overhead, and and so pedestrians. The pink sign. That could possibly be you. I've put up many of them in my time. So when you're working for the client, when you lodge the planning application, you will be given a pink sign. I've got a couple of them in my office as examples. Should we go grab one and we'll show it? They're behind my flip-up desk.
Pause the recording here and then pick up another one from planning?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because we've just you've literally taken us the little step from the topic this morning to the topic this morning. Like the next topic is literally planning.
I'm just going to stop it and start a whole new one. So we will go on to planning. But so the pink sign, so when you lodge your application, they will send you a notice for advertising. So planning is public. They want to make sure that your neighbours are quite aware of any development going on in the area and the public at large, you know. So there is a fee that has to be paid, not only your planning application, but a fee for advertising, and that covers the cost of the pink signs, and it covers an ad in the newspaper to say that lot number, whatever, has a application for, you know, whatever the project is. And they will give you the wording of that. So this has got a couple of signs here. So you write the exact wording of that, what goes in the newspaper, but you also write it on the pink sign. So this one was the address, section, wherever, and the zone, the planning zone, which we'll look at later in the day. We've got the proposal itself. What is it? Transport terminal, road train, assembly area. This was a company that I worked with before, Master Plan or Platters. The closing date for submissions. What's that about?
People having a week.
People having a whinge, love it. So anyone who wants to take comment on a planning application has a limited time period where they can make a submission. They can write to the planners and say what their thoughts are on this application, and so you have to advertise the date, the closing date for submission. And then obviously the phone number that they can call for more details, and whether the submission was lodged at probably Darwin, and they just circle the one down here, so this is for Darwin. So we've got a couple of different planning departments, Darwin, Alice and Catherine have their own ones, and Palmerston, but the Palmerston one's a bit funny. The Palmerston, any applications in Palmerston, they still go through the DCA. There's still the same government department that we spoke about. However, their board that sits is a bit different because they've got members of the Palmerston City Council on that. But the same town planners will have a look. So I'll just leave that there. So there are a few different signs then as well. So we have different types of planning applications and they have different signs for the different ones. But this is the pink one that you must normally see is the proposed development for a site. They'll also tell you how many signs. So depending on how, so if it's just a dwelling house, they'll just have one sign on the front fence. But I've certainly had a couple of applications where I've had to put up 4 or 5 signs on the one site, depending on how many different road frontages there are. And you might have to put one all the way around the boundary of the site. I'm just going to pause there for a moment because I haven't started this again, and we'll go back into planning.
I've noticed now that on those pink ones for the residential area, they're actually putting them up even for extension of the verandas and things. It's not.
Any time you have to go to planning, you get a pink sign. Every single time.
Yeah.
But it's where you don't see them is if it's compliant and it's a class 1 and 10 and it doesn't go to planning at all. So there's never a pink sign for a fully compliant class 1 and 10 construction, extension, renovation, because you're going directly to the certifier.
Like as in NAC sheds or...
No, commercial's different. Class 1 and 10.
If they're going into your yard.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so a shed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if it's compliant, straight to the certifier. No planning.
Okay.
Yeah, no pink sign. But if it's non-compliant and you're requesting a waiver, you have to go to planning. You get a pink sign to let people know what you're doing, because you're actually amending the planning scheme, which is the legal document. So you've got to let people know so that they can say something about it if they have an issue. Yeah, so you'll only see signs if you've got to go to planning, and that's because it's non-compliant at the class 1 and 10. For 2 and 3 to 9 projects, you have to go to planning regardless, and you get a sign regardless. Yeah, compliant or not.
So for our assessment too, we're going to need the middle bit, that one.
Would be the pink one.
Because we have to change the colour.
Oh, yeah, that's a little different. Yeah, quite right.
Which
That would
is
be
in
the
zoners.
pink and yellow, yeah, quite right.
Rezoning,
I
yeah.
think there's a green one as well, isn't there? What's that? Is that for consolidation?
Oh, possibly, yeah.
Yeah,
If you're merging a couple of lots
yeah,
together,
yeah, it might be.
consolidation. Yeah. And quite often you see the concurrent one, so that's when you're doing a couple of things at the same time. So you're rezoning the site, and you're applying for planning consent for a new building as well. If you're doing both of those at the same time, you might use the concurrent one. So we are going to do this next time. Okay.
So putting those signs up, is that like the last thing they do before, let's say, they either approve or reject? Or like, do basically the planning department, do they, whatever they had to do before they issue those signs to put up?
No, so they haven't really looked at the planning application. The way it works is you lodge the planning application, and then you get the sign pretty much the day. It used to be you would go into the office. Now they have a whole online system, which I'm just about to show you. But we lodge most of our planning applications online these days. But when you used to go in and lodge it manually, you might have a check from your client for the fees or something, they would just hand you the pink signs. Often you lodge it online now and go in and